Yeah, this one is kind of straight out of the Twilight Zone, I think. There was an article titled "Wisconsin Court Delivers Another Setback to the State's Democracy." And it's from the July 5th Maddow blog. So it's Maddow, um, the blog on MSNBC.com. And so the article starts out talking about a board member on the Wisconsin Natural Resources Board, which is responsible for setting state policies and related to wildlife and air and water resources and so forth. So way back in 2015, then Governor Republican Scott Walker, no relation, appointed Frederick Prane to a 6-year term on the board, and so his nomination was confirmed by the state legislature. And then in 2019, Wisconsin voted in a new Democratic governor, Tony Evers. So, and then in 2021, when Prane's term expired on the board, or at least it was set to expire, the governor was should have been able to appoint the replacement. The problem is that Wisconsin's Republican-leaning Senate decided that they weren't going to confirm any of the governor's appointees. Just blanket no, just no more. And and the statute that actually details that transition process is a little hazy. It on one hand it says that there's a 6-year term, and on the other hand it says that the board member should serve until the incoming board member is confirmed. And I can understand that they want to make sure that there's no gaps in coverage, but it leaves the system vulnerable for abuse. And so Prane has decided that he was going to follow the interpretation of the law that keeps him in his office. Basically, he's decided he's not going to leave until this thing that the Senate has said is never going to happens, right? And so, since they're not going to confirm any new appointees, basically, it's giving this person an indefinite term of service. So that leaves the Democratic governor basically unable to do a key portion of his job, and that is to appoint all of these various governmental employees. And so the issue was brought to the Supreme Court then, and in this past June, the court decided that what the Republicans were doing is okay. So it's basically giving them carte blanche to obstruct the elected governor's agenda. So there's really two issues going on here, I think. And the first one has to do with gerrymandering. And that's just something that any place that has representative government has to deal with this kind of thing. That's when a partisan government officials redraw district lines to unfairly favor one group or the other. Very often it's party affiliation, or it could be maybe some kind of minority gets their votes suppressed, or something like that. And so Wisconsin does have a gerrymandered map, and it's reflected by the fact that even though most voters in the state vote for Democratic candidates, most of their elected officials are Republicans. But for statewide offices, things like, or I'm sorry, for offices where the whole state votes, like governor or a U.S. senator and things like that, they elect Democratic, candidates. But for the local level positions, which include the state Senate and the state Assembly, that's the other house in their legislative branch. State Supreme Court, their Supreme Court is elected positions, and that's all done locally as well. And so all of the local elections favor the Republicans because of the gerrymandered map, while the statewide positions favor the Democrats. Now, the author of this article was a little heavy-handed. I got to admit, he was talking about how Wisconsin is heavily gerrymandered. Although there is evidence that shows that the demographic trends in Wisconsin have been shifting in a way that the people are kind of helping out the gerrymandering process, because the Democrats are moving into condensed, concentrated urban areas at a higher rate, and the Republican voters are moving out into the more sparsely dispersed outer state. And so they're kind of helping out. And I found an interesting article about that particular thing, about whether or not Wisconsin is heavily gerrymandered. It's called Why Do Republicans Overperform in the Wisconsin State Assembly? And this was written by John Johnson at the Marquette University Law School faculty blog. If you go to that blog and look this up, be warned, there is math content involved. So be prepared for that. But here's a quote from him. He says, "There is no serious question that the state assembly districts drawn in 2011, that was the last time that they redrew the districts, are an extreme Republican gerrymander." However, and they do, in that article, they do some of the math, and they can demonstrate that. And so, but that fact does not show, let's see, where was the quote? So there's no serious question that the state assembly districts drawn in 2011 are an extreme Republican gerrymander. However, that fact does not establish how much better Democrats would have done under a fairer map. The gerrymander only shows its teeth when Democrats do well statewide. When Tony Evers won the statewide vote in 2018, he still lost to Scott Walker in 63 of the assembly districts. Under the previous decade's map, Walker would have only won 53 seats. And so there's just a slight difference there. This statistic is telling for two reasons. First, it shows the strength of that 2011 gerrymander. Okay, it won just that alone, won the Republicans 10 extra seats in the assembly. Second, though, it shows the extent to which Wisconsin's political geography stacks the deck against Democrats, even in the absence of deliberate gerrymandering. So there's kind of a double whammy happening here. Just the natural drift of the population is affecting it, and then the gerrymandering is piling on top of that. So while the gerrymandering is a serious issue, it's not the only factor at work here. And if anybody else wants to jump in, just interrupt me. I'm a teacher. I'll just fill the time. Otherwise,
yeah, no. We'll so, and when we talk about gerrymandering, there really are two major types, because there can be good gerrymandering. It's really difficult when you're talking about demographics. You're talking about where people live, because anybody can live pretty much anywhere. We still consider this a free country to some extent, free with an asterisk behind it. So when you say, oh, well, gerrymandering, it's all bad, it tends to be. There have been some districts that have been helpful. But we've talked about gerrymandering a little bit, and I'm sure we'll do more episodes on that. As we still try to figure out this whole American experiment, as it were. And Scott, you touched a little bit on some of the biases within this article, and Richard, I know you took exception a little bit. I do want to read one thing that really bothered me. I'm going to read it verbatim from this article, and it's in parentheses, so it's already trying to be a little snarky. In Wisconsin, state Supreme Court elections are technically nonpartisan, but it's painfully obvious which judicial candidates enjoy which candidates' backing. And, well, Richard, why don't you talk about the biases from there? Because we also have our own bias. This show is not, we try to get facts right, but we are giving our opinion as skeptic humanists. So, Richard?
Yeah, and I think that was, for me, was the first thing out of everything in this article. The first thing I noticed was the bias of the author. And I don't want to put people off reading the article, because I don't necessarily disagree with the conclusions he draws. But I think part of our job on this show, and certainly my job in the activism work I do, is promoting skepticism. And that starts, and always should start, with ourselves. And this author, just, for me, it just stood out that his bias, political bias, was just oozing through every word in this article. It really, there was no doubt as to which side he was on. It was not impartial in any way whatsoever. And I think that for me is one of the things that needs pointing out. As far as the article goes itself, like I said, I don't disagree with the conclusions. I mean, what the Republican Party said that democracy was an annoyance that must occasionally be ignored. And that's vile. That somebody can actually come out and say things like that. The Republicans are coming out here and saying, well, let's throw democracy away if it's not in our favor. That should not be allowed. And there was one line in this article that really, really got under my skin, and kind of in the notes I went on a little bit of a rant about it, and that was when I don't remember who it was who said it. It was Robin Voss or Vos, the Speaker of the Republican-led State Assembly, and a month after the 2018 elections, he said, "We are going to have a very liberal governor who is going to enact policies that are in direct contrast to what many of us believe in." And that single line, in direct contrast to what many of us believe in, is everything that is wrong with the right-wing Christian conservative. It's literally the core of every argument I've had with the theist. It's the core of every offensive, hurtful decision made by those in authority. And it is at the core of why education needs to be based in skepticism and focused in fighting bad ideas. Because when what you believe in is based on an interpretation of your religious text, and that interpretation is filtered through 500 years, as I talked about the last show I was on, of wrangling and arguing before it's even written down, and then filtered by numerous wranglings and arguments for a further 1,500 years before it gets to your particular place of worship, and then filtered, because we like a lot of filtering in this, through the interpretation of your religious leader before being delivered to you in a nice, friendly, pretty little package box that just happens to fit with the overall feeling of your particular community. Then what you believe in is absolutely irrelevant if you are in a position where you're making political decisions based on those beliefs. And that statement should rid itself of the idea of the liberal governor and instead look at decisions that are made not on the back of religious ideological interpretation, but instead on human decency, protection, and compassion. I'm done. Rant over.
No, absolutely. Teo, I don't think you've chimed in yet on this.
Well, as I was saying in the previous segment, I am el Latino, el tipo Latino. So obviously for me, I might be a little bit too dense to understand American politics, especially because I keep confusing both of them. I don't really know which one is Republican or which one is the Democrat. I just have to look the cartoon of the elephant ripping off an uterus to understand which one that is. And I still don't know which color that is, blue, red, no idea. But what got my attention, once again, it was hard to understand this for me, so I hope you can explain some stuff for me. But I got to a point when I read what was happening, and I was like, imagine if I could just go and say, no, boss, I don't want you to fire me. I will keep my job until I want, and you cannot do anything about it because I'm trying to interpret this my contract in this certain way. It's so weird that this thing that the new governor wants a specific person in the place and he cannot do it. I mean, what's the idea? Where's your power, guy? Why were you chosen if you cannot put the people that you want in the place that you need? I really don't understand how politics work over there. It's insane for me. I know we shouldn't use that word, but the whole situation is so ludicrous that I'm struggling a lot to understand what is happening.
It's interesting that you say, that, you don't understand. I mean, we don't understand it either. And right wing, left wing, they're really part of the same bird. you know, two sides of the same coin. You hear a lot of the sameness, but you also said how, you know, the people elected this governor in to do a job, and he doesn't have the power to do his job. And we're seeing that, you know, on the congressional level, we're seeing it in the Senate, we're seeing it in the presidency. We elect these people to do a job, and it doesn't matter if it's Republican, it doesn't matter if it's a Democrat, doesn't matter if it's an independent, because we do have independents in there as well. Not many. The simple fact of the matter is that we've told them, you've got a job to do to protect the American people, to defend the Constitution. And we're seeing it as, wait a minute, you're not doing it. Or you're doing it just as long as you can protect the Second Amendment. You know, we're not seeing this full protection. And one of the things I said is it's we're seeing the same plays, the obstruction, the, you know, we're in the minority and all of a sudden we have more power somehow. It's just a play that keeps working, and I don't know it. You know, when you say, Teo, you know, how's this working? We don't know either. We don't know how we got here, but we did.
Something that got my attention from my article, and let me quote it, please. When they are discussing this or explaining the thing of the why they cannot remove the other guy, I'm going to quote. When Wisconsin's laws were created, policymakers didn't envision a system in which state senators would simply refuse to confirm nominees in order to reward the appointees of a defeated former governor. And as soon as I read this immediately hit me in how whenever I see different kinds of debates in the USA, they call the founding fathers and what they could have expected. And why do you still think about what would they say? They were people who had no idea how the country would evolve. And I think that this situation is a great example why your current laws must not depend on what the founding fathers thought or didn't think about, but as Richard said, or who said, I don't know, but rather on the common good and well-being of the citizens of the country, not on what good old people who had slaves and didn't know what I don't know what anything that we have nowadays is. But it's
am I right, Scott and
Sorry.
Jason, in thinking that the founding fathers actually wrote in a clause so that the laws could be changed to make sure that it was updated if it needed to be?
Absolutely. That's why we have amendments. And there are some interpretations that, you know, the entire Constitution should have been ripped up like every 20 years so it can be rebuilt stronger instead of being this monolithic thing. Which monolithic, we'll get into that in the fourth segment. But Scott, why don't you go ahead and take us out from this segment?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, what's happening here. Yes, there are ways that we can update the laws, but also factored into this initial formulation of our country is this idea of checks and balances. And so what we've seen here, and this is, you know, we talked about gerrymandering already, and you know, and that's a concern. That's a concern. In fact, I do agree that this article was clearly lopsided. Although, in his defense, it's a blog entry, and so I kind of treat those kind of more like op-eds, and so maybe I cut him a little bit more slack there. But one thing that I liked about that is, and I'm on like my third tangent here. I'm like 3 tangents deep. One thing that I like about when I run into that is it makes me want to double check, right? If somebody's going to come in with a clearly slanted article, whether it agrees with my position or whether it doesn't agree with my position, my first thought is, why is he wording it, or why are they wording it so heavily in that direction? And so that's how I came across that other article that was full of all the wonderful math. But what we're looking at here, though, is the more concerning issue of the system being taken advantage of, right? We have these party leaders that are representing their party agenda over everything else. A perfect example here is, you know, I don't know how many years ago, it was what I suppose about 10 years ago, Mitch McConnell. He proudly boasted that he would not even open a discussion on any of President Obama's Supreme Court nominees. And that was without even knowing who those who those nominees were going to be. And so, you know, it's really a childish way, you know, it's my way or the highway. And it reminds me of a time when I was 4 or 5 years old, and my friend who lived down the street from me got this brand new Batman car for his birthday. It was this plastic Batman car, and I wanted to play with it, and he said no, he wanted to play with it, and it was his, you know, it was his call there. But I didn't want to, and so I smashed it on the ground, and it smashed into 1,000 pieces. I have a distinct memory of that moment of watching it almost in slow motion crash against the car. Now that's not a moment that I was particularly proud of in my life, and I hope that I've learned and matured since then. But I think it really illustrates the attitude here. It's the willingness of, in this case, a particular party. Or I would say even a small group of individuals within that party, are willing to manipulate the system, you know, and this victory at all costs attitude. It's really it's just separating the country more and more, and it's not something that's going to get better on its own. You know, we can fix the problem, but that involves action and doing things. And I don't know if I would, if this is a very controversial thing for me to say, but Americans are kind of lazy. And so, you know, if we want to get things done, you know, it just has to, you know, I'm not entirely confident in this case that things will get better. It might take a long time. But, you know, but we have to recognize that this is what's going on here. And I said that in this case, it's one party. That doesn't necessarily mean that the Democratic Party is all innocent angels, right? If the roles were reversed, if the situation were reversed, you know, we might be seeing, you know, Nancy Pelosi saying, we're not going to, you know, we're going to stand firm on this, or we're going to obstruct. And they have done that to some extent. But again, it's a delicate balance between, are we using these checks and balances as they were intended? Are we using them to, ensure the quality of our government, or are we using that as a tool for us to get, you know, for a small number of people to get what they want? And it's you know, as a citizen, it's frustrating to see. As somebody who votes, it's frustrating to see. As somebody who talks about this stuff, it gives us lots of fodder for the show, right? And, you know, it gives us a place to go. But it's you know, it kicks in that those ancient morals that God wrote on all of our hearts, right? You know, that we favor, that we want to see fairness. I don't know if that was my sarcasm there detectable.
Yeah,
okay.
no.
Okay.
Good. But
right.
just think, Scott. Yeah. You know, just think, if you had kept that selfish and narcissistic attitude from a child, you could have been president by now.
But at what expense? At what expense, right?
Hey,
I have to wear my hair like that. And,
no,
you know,
it's
just not worth
I'm
it.
not saying any specific person. I'm not saying any specific person.